Thank you, Kira, and thanks for sharing that testimony too of God using you, even not in ways you're expecting or even when you're injured. That's awesome. Good morning, everyone. I'm Geoff. This is our final Sunday morning in Sermon on the Mount, but as Kira said, it'll continue on in our study season at night. But the way Matthew, Jesus' friend, tells the story in Matthew chapter 5, in his version of Jesus' life, he said that one day Jesus saw that crowds were gathering, and so he got his disciples and he said, come on guys, let's go up on this hill, and Jesus sat down, which is what teachers did in Jesus' day. If you were going to teach today like I am now, you'd get up and you'd stand while everyone listening sits, but it was the opposite in Jesus' culture. He sat down and everyone knew that was their cue to be quiet and to stand and gather around and listen, and he began to teach them. And he showed them a new way of seeing the world, and he invited them into this transformation with God so that they could live in a new way, in this different way of seeing the world. And so that's what we've been looking at as Jesus cast this vision. And he said to them, they were Jewish listeners. What they built their lives on was the Old Testament, the laws that God had given in the Old Testament. And he said, hey, I haven't come to get rid of that, but I have come to fulfill it and to reinterpret it. And that's the section that we're in now, with a whole bunch of examples of how he says, hey, it says this, but let me tell you what that really means. Let me tell you what's really on God's heart and what that looks like for your life. And so that's what we're in at the moment. There are three examples or things that he reinterprets. And they seem random and scattered, but there is a theme through them. They're all about what happens when our will clashes with the will of someone else. When we end up clashing with other people and fighting with them in our words or our actions or in our attitudes towards them. And so we're going to read the whole section from Matthew chapter 5, verse 33 onwards in a moment, but I'm not going to read it to you. We're going to use the Streetlights Bible, which is an audio recording. That's just going to play, and you'll be able to follow along on the screen, the whole section of Jesus' teaching, and then we'll have a look at it bit by bit. So check out the screen.
Teaching about vows. You have also heard that our ancestors were told, you must not break your vows. You must carry out the vows you make to the Lord. But I say, do not make any vows. Do not say, by heaven, because heaven is God's throne. And do not say, by the earth, because the earth is his footstool. And do not say, by Jerusalem, but Jerusalem is the city of the great king. Do not even say, by my head, but you can't turn one hair white or black. Just say a simple, yes, I will, or no, I won't. Anything beyond this is from the evil one. Teaching about revenge. You have heard the law that says the punishment must match the injury. An eye for an eye, and a tooth for a tooth. But I say, do not resist an evil person. If someone slaps you on the right cheek, offer the other cheek also. If you are sued in court and your shirt is taken from you, give your coat too. If a soldier demands that you carry his gear for a mile, carry it 2 miles. Give to those who ask, and don't turn away from those who want to borrow. Teaching about love for enemies. You have heard the law that says, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say, love your enemies. Pray for those who persecute you. In that way, you will be acting as true children of your Father in heaven. For he gives his sunlight to both the evil and the good. And he sends rain on the just and the unjust alike. If you love only those who love you, what reward is there for that? Even corrupt tax collectors do that much. If you are kind only to your friends, how are you different from anyone else? Even pagans do that. But you are to be perfect, even as your Father in heaven is perfect.
Some of Jesus' most famous words, but also some of his most challenging. What do we do when our will clashes with the will of someone else? Jesus teaches us a different way to fight. So let's start with the section about vows, the teaching about vows. The vows that Jesus is talking about is like when you and I would add something to what we're saying to try and gain some credibility or gain some trust. It'd be like, I'm not just telling you I'm going to do this, I pinky promise that I'm going to do this. Or you might add a cross my heart and hope to die, that if I don't do this, that's how much I believe in it. Or you might say, I swear on someone's grave, or something like that. All of these are just attempts to add credibility to us. If you don't believe me, well, let me add something to that so that you will believe me. And sometimes these are silly and sometimes these are fun, but at its heart, it's an attempt to convince or to manipulate other people. If my words aren't enough, if you don't believe me just by me saying it, then let me convince you or manipulate you to trust me with what I'm adding to my words. And so, the simplest way is we might add God's name to that. Like, on God, I'm going to do this. Or on God's name, I'm going to do this. Or on God's authority, you can trust me. But back in Jesus' day, they didn't use God's name. It was precious to them. They never said it out loud. And so they would swear by other things. And that's what Jesus is talking about. He'd say, you might swear by God's throne or by heaven or by the earth or by Jerusalem. They were the things they would add to prove their trustworthiness. And so this, I'm going to give you the background. This is what Jesus is referring to from the Old Testament. In the Law of Moses, the first 5 books of the Old Testament, it's called the Law of Moses, it's called the Torah, it's called the Pentateuch, all these different names. For the Jewish people listening, for them it was the Torah, the teaching. And this is where these laws came from. And there's 3 there that Jesus kind of summarizes. Just for example, let me read Numbers 30, verse 2 to you. A man who makes a vow to the Lord or takes an oath to bind himself with a pledge must not break his word. He must do exactly as he promised, which seems really clear. That's what God had asked his people to do, just keep your word. But by the time of Jesus, it had become like a game. Which promises really counted and which ones could you get away with breaking? In a simple way, it'd be like, I had my fingers crossed behind my back when I made that promise, and so, I don't have to keep it anymore. That's the game that they were playing with each other. They'd be like, oh, I swore by my head, but I didn't swear by the hairs on my head. Or I swore by Jerusalem, the city, but not by the temple itself or the gold in the temple, and so, gotcha. I've manipulated you, I've made you believe me, but I've tricked you and gotten out of my promise. That's what was happening. These were loopholes, and Jesus says, stop. Don't treat each other like that. In fact, just don't make vows. Use your own words and your own credibility. And if that's not enough, you've got some life issues to deal with if people won't believe what you've said. If you've broken your word that many times, don't bring me into it. Don't try and manipulate with other ways. Live in a different way so that your words do have meaning and credibility. And then he says, anything else, you add anything else to your words, it comes from the evil one. That's a little bit full on. Now, I wonder if you can think for a minute, in the Old Testament, those first 5 books, is there an example of the evil one, of Satan, using words to manipulate people? In the Garden of Eden, with Eve, the serpent said, did God really say? Used words to manipulate her. And so Jesus says, hey, when you speak and you use your words to try and manipulate each other, you're not getting what you want, and so you use a vow or some other way to manipulate each other, you're actually acting like the evil one. So stop, don't do that. Just let your yes mean yes, and let your no mean no. So what does this mean for us? We don't do vows like that anymore. Jesus isn't really saying don't make pinky promises and then cross your fingers behind you. That's not really what he's talking about. But I think an example for us is that we still use God's name to give ourselves credibility and to get what we want and to manipulate each other. God told me to do something. And I know you're not going to like it, but God told me, so too bad. Some of a more extreme example, and I hope no one's ever said this to you, when you were looking for a relationship, but God told me we're supposed to be together. No one ever said that to me, but I've heard other people use that language before. God gave me a peace about this decision, and I know you're going to hate it, but God gave me the peace, so blame him. It's not on me. It's like we use it as a get out of jail free card and try and manipulate each other. And so Jesus warns us to use that language carefully. God does speak to us. God does give us peace. God does guide us in our life. He's a conversational God. But it doesn't just start and end with, okay, I reckon that's what God's saying. I'm now going to deliver it and shut the conversation down. Because if you ever say to someone, well, God told me, or God said, or God's doing this, that's a conversation ender. All discernment stops at that point, and you can accidentally or intentionally manipulate someone with your words. I can remember as a younger pastor, I had a senior pastor that I was responsible to. He was my boss. And I can remember in a meeting the moment when I realized I could spiritually manipulate him right now. We had a clash of wills. I thought we should do one thing and he thought we should do another, and I knew I was right and he was wrong. And so I thought, you know what, this is what's happening in my head. All I have to do is tell him, I had this dream. And I believe it was from God, and this is what the dream was about. Or I just had this sense in my spirit, and it links with this Bible verse, and what do you know? It points to what I think we should do. And it was a scary thought. It happened in the middle of a meeting, a group of people sitting around. I'm like, oh my goodness, I could do this right now. I could spiritually manipulate someone by invoking God's name. Now, thankfully, I didn't. I chose not to. But the opportunity's there, and sometimes we do it without even realizing it. So there's a whole nother sermon in this, and we've preached it before, we'll preach it again. But God does speak to you. And so if you think God has spoken to you or given you a peace or helped you make a decision, hold that and believe that. But submit that to other Christians that you trust for some added discernment. Don't just stand on it and go, this is it now, this is my closed-handed delivery of the word of the Lord. Ask for input and discernment, and then when you do share it with an open hand. That's not manipulative. Okay, hey, I'm making this decision, and I know you're not going to like it. I have a sense from God. I think God said to me that I should, but I'm standing on this decision myself. I'm not blaming someone else, and I'm not trying to manipulate you with God's name. That's what Jesus is talking about here when he talks about vows. When you have a clash of wills, don't manipulate. Become trustworthy by doing what you say and saying what you do. But what about when it gets physical, when it gets violent? This is where Jesus talks about turning the other cheek. Again, he's quoting from 3 different Old Testament passages, and they say slightly different things, but essentially they all say the same thing, and they're all courtroom kind of legal language for what happens when damage is done. So again, just as an example, in Leviticus 24, verse 17, it says that anyone who takes another person's life must be put to death. Anyone who kills another person's animal must pay for it in full. Give them a live animal for the animal that you killed. Anyone who injures another person must be dealt with according to the injury inflicted. A fracture for a fracture, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. Whatever anyone does to injure another person must be paid back in kind. This sounds like permission for revenge. But what it was intended to be was a limitation on retaliation. So what was happening when God instructed Moses to speak these words, that's recorded in Leviticus, so I call it the law of Moses, is that the cultures around them were revenge-based, and things would just escalate and escalate and escalate. And you know what that's like because you have a sibling like that, don't you? Or there was a kid in your class like that, wasn't there? Or you work with someone like that. Or every time you hear the news from the Middle East or the US, it sounds like that's what they're doing to each other. It just goes on and on and on. And so the idea behind the law was not to kind of have proportional revenge. The idea was to limit retaliation. That was the original intent. Don't let this turn into a blood feud for generations and generations. Don't let this get out of hand. Let's have a proportional response. And in many ways, our world still works like that, doesn't it? Our legal system operates with that principle. Our parenting often operates with that principle. And our world wars. But it doesn't work very well, does it? And so Jesus says, stop. You've heard it say, but here's what's really going on. Here's how you really need to live. Don't resist an evil person. What he's saying there, the kind of concept there is not like don't ever stop them. It's not that kind of resist. He's saying don't resist in kind. So if they do something to you, don't retaliate in accordance with the way they've treated you. Don't treat them the way they've treated you. And so what he's not saying, let me just say this clearly at this point, he's not saying be a doormat. Let people do whatever they want to you, put up with abuse. That's not what Jesus is talking about at all. And that'll become clear as we just quickly unpack his 3 examples. The slapping, for example. If you know, generally most people in the world are right-handed. And what does it say? Someone slaps you on the right cheek is what Jesus said. I wonder if I could get a volunteer, actually. No, I wouldn't do that. We'll just imagine it, okay? If I, with my right hand, I'm going to slap someone on their right cheek, I can't use all my force because their right cheek is on the other side of their face. That's going to have to be a backhanded slap, isn't it? And first of all, that's not going to hurt very much. But second of all, that's really symbolic. And even if you're not from a Middle Eastern culture, it's not hard to imagine that a backhanded slap is not really about causing damage. It's about causing shame. And so if someone tries to cause you shame, Jesus says, why don't you offer them the other cheek also, which would be an open-handed, full-on, physical, violent slap. That would be a shock. In his culture, when people would try and shame someone with a backhanded slap, if all of a sudden he said, no, come on, why don't you do it properly? They will go, oh. It forces them to rethink their position. Do I actually want to do that? And it's usually in front of other people. Do I really want to take this step and do a proper slap to this person? Or was I just trying to be a bit narky and be a bit rude and try and shame them? So Jesus is not saying, open slather of violence, let them beat you up. That's not what he's saying. He's saying don't resist them in the same way, don't slap them back, but instead make them own up to their action. Are you really that petty? Are you really? Come on. Are you really going to be that violent? And it's the same way then when he talks about the soldier. And so the soldiers in that day, Rome is oppressing them. Rome is their enemies. We'll get to that in a minute, how they feel about their enemies. But Roman soldiers were legally allowed to ask any Jewish citizen to carry their stuff for a mile. But that's all. After the mile, you had to take it back. And so you can imagine this scenario where as a Jewish person, you're being forced by someone in power. This is not the same as us asking each other for help. Someone in power is saying to you, you must do this. You carry it for a mile, and at the end they say, all right, your time's up, give it back. You say, no, I'm going to keep going. You go, hang on a minute. Can you imagine there's probably more than one soldier? They're kind of nervously laughing. But they know the law. They know they're allowed to let you carry it a second mile. It redefines the relationship. It's supposed to shock. It's supposed to make the oppressor or the violent person, hang on a minute. Now, there is a chance that that person will take advantage of you even more. But Jesus is saying, don't just jump to this retaliation. That's not God's heart behind the original law, and it's not how I want my people to live. Instead, let's live in a different way. And then the one I skipped over there is the courtroom one, which would take ages to go into. But the idea, again, is of exploitation. You could legally take someone's shirt and it all seems above board, but it's kind of just this sneaky exploitative way to go, I'm gonna get what's mine. I've left you your coat. I'm still a decent human being. But there's an exploitation in the system. It's a broken system that people on the underside of society get taken advantage by. And so he says, expose the system. If your shirt gets taken from you in court, don't sue them back. Offer your coat as well, because everyone there in the courtroom is going to be like, what is happening? Why are they doing this? You're exposing the oppression and the broken system. That's what's happening all the way through here. So Jesus is saying to us, someone has power over you. Don't fight power with power. Someone is trying to hurt you. Don't respond in the same way and hurt them back. Respond with creative courage in a way that redefines your relationship with them. So if someone at work is making your life difficult, don't just do the bare minimum and get by. Shock them. Surprise them. Expose what's going on by continuing to treat them with kindness and generosity and professionalism. Professionality? Being professional. Professionalism, thank you. Jesus is teaching us a different way to fight. He says his people don't retaliate. They don't treat people in kind the way they've been treated. Instead, they're creative and they're surprising as they keep standing up. That's tough, but it's pretty cool to think about, pretty inspiring, that kind of non-violent resistance. But Jesus still hasn't reached the hardest part of his teaching. Now he talks about loving our enemies. So we're beyond words that manipulate. We're beyond physical actions and even violence. We're at developed negative relationship. We're at ops. We're at enemies. Now, Jesus' audience expected him to say, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But where did they get that idea? Because that's not even in the Old Testament law. Let me show you. In Leviticus 19:18, it says, don't seek revenge or bear a grudge against a fellow Israelite, so people from your own country, but love your neighbor as yourself. Jesus quoted that in another part of teaching. That's good. That's the people like you. But even then, God told his people to treat others even in a good way as well. And so if you come upon your enemy's ox or donkey, this is Exodus, that is strayed away, it's not yours, take it back to its owner, even though they're your enemy. If you see the donkey of someone who hates you, has collapsed under its load, don't walk by, instead stop and help. That sounds like love your enemies, but somehow that's not what they were expecting when Jesus said it. And then even if you go back to Leviticus 19 a little bit later on, so it's love your neighbor as yourself, the people like you, love them. But then a few verses later, don't take advantage of foreigners who live among you in your land. Treat them like your own people, like native-born Israelites, and love them as you love yourself. Why? Remember that you were once foreigners living in the land of Egypt. Would anyone hearing those words have had living memory of that? No. By the time Moses gave those laws and they entered the land, a whole generation had died out. By the time Jesus and his people are living by those laws, dozens of generations have died out, and yet they could remember and imagine what it would be like to not be in their own country. And so they should treat other people well like that. And so, okay, this sounds really good. Why does Jesus say, you've heard it say, love your neighbor but hate your enemies? Why did people not balk at that? By his day, hatred for enemies had just become this normal thing, despite the fact that that's not what God asked them to do. And there's a few reasons why that might be the case. One is they fought literal enemies in war. And when you're in physical warfare, it's really hard to love your enemies. And so that was a developed thing that happened. In the Psalms, which are poetic cries for help and for justice, there's talk there asking God to crush their enemies. These are cries and prayers of desperation. And then also the context that they lived in. Jesus and his people were under this incredible oppression. The Romans made their lives miserable, and so it was perfectly acceptable for them to hate their enemies. But Jesus says, stop. Jesus says, love your enemies instead. Pray for those who persecute you. Not because they're right, not because justice doesn't matter, but because your enemies are people too. That's what Jesus appeals to. He says, your enemies are just like you. They're created in God's image. And God loves them as he loves you. And so Jesus' people don't hate. Jesus' people surprise their enemies with love. Now, notice the progression in the three that we've talked about already, okay? How does Jesus want us to fight when we're against each other? Well, rather than manipulation, retaliation, and hate, which all come naturally to me, rather than doing those things, Jesus says we've got to live a different way and treat people a different way and fight in a different way with courageous and creative love. So people are manipulating me, or I'm tempted to manipulate them, then I need to just speak the truth and speak well to them and of them. If people are hurting me or oppressing me or abusing me, I need to stand up to them, but not in the same way, not fighting violence with violence, in a different, creative, courageous way. And then when I'm just like angry and filled with hate against people because of the way they've hurt me or because they look different from me or they act different from me, Jesus says, hang on a minute, they are the same as you in God's eyes. So if you're okay with God loving you and you're okay with God loving them, then how can you not also have love in your heart for them? It sounds great. This sounds like really good stuff for other people to do. And you would be well within your rights to be sitting here thinking, can anybody actually live like this? Is Jesus giving us this impossible kingdom of God ethic? Well, to get to that answer to that question, we have to get to the hardest part of this whole section, the bit that Jesus says at the end. He says, refuse to play by other people's rules, but instead be perfect, just as your Father in heaven is perfect. Now, it's going to be helpful for us to understand that word that's recorded in the book of Matthew and translated into perfect means perfect, but it's a bigger word than that. They didn't have a lot of words to choose from in ancient Greek language, but their words had way more meaning than our English words mean. And so that word that we have as perfect, as teleos in ancient Greek, which means perfect, but it also means complete and whole and mature. Kind of, something that's brought to its intended goal, something that's in its fullness. And so when I hear be perfect like God is perfect, I think moral perfection, holy, making no mistakes, just like God is. But if you understand everything Jesus is saying in the Sermon on the Mount and the things that he said about God, he can't mean that. He knows we're not morally perfect and he knows we never will be. It's a lot more likely he's talking about God's wholeness and completeness. And he is always inviting us into wholeness and completeness as well. To live in the way that God created you and I to live is to live with maturity and live with wholeness and completeness. We wouldn't really say in English, or I wouldn't really say in English, that's to live perfectly, but I would say it's to live with wholeness. And that's what Jesus is talking about. God, the Father, loves. He pours out rain of blessing and sunshine of blessing on the righteous and the unrighteous. On good people and evil people, God loves with wholeness and completeness. And Jesus is saying, that's what I'm inviting you to do. And just to kind of confirm that, later in the New Testament, the Apostle Paul uses the exact same word in talking about us and how we grow and mature. He says, we tell others about Christ, warning everyone, teaching everyone with all the wisdom God's given us. Why? Because we want to present them to God perfect, teleos, whole in their relationship to Christ. That's what Jesus is inviting us into. Now, Brian covered this in week 1. The goal is not that you do everything perfectly and you follow Jesus exactly and everything is good. He knows you won't. The Sermon on the Mount is never meant to bring condemnation or shame. It's to invite you to turn around and come back to him for forgiveness and continue walking with him. Laura covered this last week in week 2. Jesus is the only one who could technically do this. He fulfilled everything and then invites us into this transformation of the heart that leads to a different way to live, a way of wholeness and completeness. Jesus is interested. He's invested in you becoming everything that God created you to be. He wants you to be. He actually gives his Spirit to live inside you to help you slowly become like him, to become complete and to become whole. And so as we think about these examples, we go, okay, I want to live in this different way. How in the world could I start living that way? Because I just am straight to using words to get what I want. I'm just straight to, you hit me, I'm coming right back at you. It just instinctively comes out of me. How can we do that? Well, when we see the example Jesus gives, we go, okay, that's how he wants me to live, and he's going to help me do it. Next time you notice yourself doing it, stop. Like Jesus said. He said, you've heard this, but hang on a minute. Next time you notice yourself reacting in that way, hatred in your heart to someone else, stop for a minute. Go, hang on a minute. I think Jesus might want me to react differently, but I don't know how. Like, I'd like to give him a right hook to the face. I can't think of any better option than that right now, but I think he wants me to. And then just stop and take a deep breath and say, Jesus, is there anything else I could do here? And you'll be amazed at the ideas that come to mind. The creative, the courageous, the non-violent, the loving inspiration that Jesus gives you to treat people differently than the way they've treated you. Just go, ooh, I'm just about to fire right back at them. I've got something preloaded, but I'm just going to take a breath and count to 10 in my head and go, I'm about to deliver this, Lord. But if you've got a different way, I'm open to it for the next 10 seconds, or this is coming out of my mouth. And if you partner with him like that, his transformation will not just hit your heart, it'll hit your words and hit your hands and hit your feet. And you'll start to not just get Jesus' vision of a new way to live, but you'll start living in a new way as well. And man, the world will be shocked and curious about why. And that's the whole idea. Let me pray for you. Jesus, we thank you for just what a great teacher you were when you walked the earth. These are amazing things that we could unpack for hours, and yet also just in a moment could have a read, and it challenges us even just at that first reading. And thank you that you were an incredible teacher. And for the example that you give us, we're inspired by it, and we want to live this way, but we know that we can't. We know that we won't, no matter how hard we try. And so you're not just a teacher, but as our creator, you empower us to live in this new way, this way that you first designed us to live. And so we ask for your help because we need it. We have our instinctive ways to deal with clashes. We have our inbuilt ways to fight. But we want to live in the way that you invite us to. And so would you transform us? God, some people might even be getting some ideas right now. Ways of fighting that they've never thought of before, but that match the example you gave. And for others, for the rest of us, would you bless us first with noticing it, with realizing what we're doing, and then just enough self-control to take a deep breath and wait. And that your Spirit would give us creative, courageous, loving ways to fight instead. Pray that you help us with that this afternoon. Pray that on Tuesday morning as we walk into school, that we'd know you're with us and you'd help us then. And on Thursday afternoon when we're tired and had enough and we just want to curl up and make the world go away, that you'd help us then as well. And we ask that in your name.